Hey guys, this is the second part of the video on the pharma series. So basically talking about the pharma industry, what are the important dynamics, how to look at companies in the pharma industry, and if you remember, actually let me recap. No, so we discussed a few key concepts in the previous video. One is the importance of patents when it comes to the allocation of capital for pharma companies. Then how reimbursement prices are basically set mainly by private health insurers and national healthcare systems based on a series of metrics, and this becomes the selling price of the drug. So it's not, in a way, what I'm saying is that it's not consumers, no, it's not a business usually that sets the price of these, but it's national healthcare systems and private insurers, which in the end are businesses, but it's not any type of business. Then we also discussed that there are different types of therapies and the implications this has on manufacturing, and then also the importance of marketing and sales spend of pharma companies, and how this is a very relevant part of their budget, no? And I think the key concept from an investing perspective that I wanted to rely in the previous video is that um, at first glance, pharma companies are not defensible businesses in the long term, no? Because their performance as a company, it's mainly it mainly depends on the capital allocation strategy that they have, and capital allocation decisions are taken on the management level, no? And as you know, management sometimes does good decisions, sometimes does not do so good decisions. They switch companies, they retire. So when you're looking at a very long term, as you know, an investor like Warren Buffett would do, it's hard to see the underlying defensibility of a pharma company, because it's so dependent on management that you invest in the company, and 2 years later the CEO that made all those great decisions retires or goes to a competitor. This is something that it's very much out of your control as an investor, and it's obviously impossible to validate, no? So at first glance, if you're a very long-term investor, pharma companies don't look super attractive, no? However, the second part of this video will be dedicated to, okay, that may be partly true, but it's not entirely true. There are differences in the underlying business models of pharma companies that may make some of them more defensible and therefore better investments in the long term than others, no? And as you can see here, we have a lot of information already. And what we're going to do is compare 17 of the biggest pharma companies in the world based on different metrics, no? And some of these names probably already sound familiar. So Gilead, Merck, Novo Nordisk, Pfizer, Eli Lilly, J&J, this is United Therapeutics, this is I think Bristol Myers, AstraZeneca, Abbott, Roche, no? And so on. And we're going to compare them across all these metrics using 10-year averages, no? And so basically all these ratios and operating incomes are the 10-year averages for these companies. And this is basically from 2015 to 2024. And the question is, why are we using 10-year averages? It's because this allows us to exclude management out of the equation as much as possible, no? Because as we said, management, one of the problems with management is that it changes a lot, and it's not they do not always do the best capital allocation decisions and so on, no? So management decisions may change a lot in 10 years. So if we are looking at 10-year averages, we'll get a better view of the underlying business, and we will take management out of the equation in a way, no? As much as possible, let's say. And the metrics, just quickly, operating income, I hope everybody knows, gross margin, SG&A as percentage of revenue. SG&A expenditure as a percentage of revenue, and this is important, no? And you may ask why. I'm basically using SG&A as a proxy for sales and marketing expenditure. I don't know. I know it's not apples to apples, but I think it's a good proxy. And this is a metric that we want to understand, as I said before, because it's one of the biggest items in the budget of a pharma company. Then we did the same for R&D expenditure, so how much money they invest in developing their own assets internally. And then I'm also using one of my favorite metrics, which is return on tangible assets, and I discussed this in another video. I think it was the valuation versus quality video, but return on tangible assets, I think, gives you a good proxy for the defensibility of a certain company. And this is basically calculated as operating income divided by inventory and property, plant and equipment. So in this case, it's Gilead has a super high operating income compared to their tangible assets, so it's basically able to generate 2.3 times in income all the amount of money they spend in tangible assets. And we can also break this down further into return on inventory and return on property, plant and equipment. No? So basically these two combined, you would get, I mean, obviously the weighted average, you would get the 2.3. So it's just to gain a bit of understanding of where is the overperformance when it comes to return on tangible assets coming from. No? So in this case, Gilead is overperforming in both return on inventory and return on property, plant and equipment. But in the case of Novo Nordisk, it's mainly return on inventory. In the case of Amgen, it's mainly return on property, plant and equipment. No, that gives them this over the average return on tangible assets. And as you can see, I have also marked in blue the companies that have better than average gross margin, SG&A, and R&D expenditure as a percentage of revenue. So let's look at some of these companies, because what we want to do next is to ask ourselves, how is it possible that, let's say, Gilead has been able to generate 2.3 times in the last 10 years in average their operating income from tangible assets compared to, let's say, Merck, 0.6. And this difference already tells us that the underlying business of these pharma companies, it's different, no? And it's not only about management. Let's take a look at the first example, no? So first example, it's Amgen, and as you can see, Amgen has one of the highest returns on property, plant and equipment. Gilead is also super high, but they also have a very high return on inventory. So I wanted to dive into a company that has, an average return on inventory, but a very good above average return on property, plant and equipment, no? Because it's easier to understand one variable than two variables changing. So the first question, that we have to ask ourselves, it's why, no? Why is the return on property, plant and equipment of Amgen in average for the last 10 years much higher than, even twice the amount of some other companies? If all the pharma companies have access, we assume, to the same technology. So return on property, plant and equipment, it's itself based in two variables. One is operating income, and the other is how much they spend on capex, no? So on investing in new facilities and so on. And as we can see, gross margin for Amgen, spend on SG&A and R&D. If I go back, I mean, it's good, but it's not that good. Like, if we look at the averages here on the right, so, a bit better gross margin, a bit better percentage spent on marketing, a bit better, 1 percentage point on R&D. So most of this difference comes from how much they spend on capex, no? And the question is, why is Amgen able to generate such a high, so many dollars for capex spend compared to other companies, no? And here, if you know about the pharma industry, you know that Amgen has cutting-edge manufacturing operations, no? They are very lean. They leverage a lot of single-use bioreactors, like pieces in the manufacturing process, which allows them to have flexible production and switch from one product to another very quickly without building new facilities. No? So a single facility can be repurposed to manufacture one drug or another drug very, very quickly. And this also it's closely related to the long-term strategy of Amgen, no? Which is basically they already are one of the main players in the biosimilars market. And biosimilars market, if you remember, it's the generic version of biologic treatments, so antibody-based treatments. No? So when an antibody-based treatment goes off patent, they become a biosimilar, and everyone it's legally allowed to manufacture it, but it's not so simple, no? And Amgen has become one of the biggest players in this market, and they have very lean manufacturing facilities and know-how to take advantage of actually many of the biosimilars that will biological drugs that will go off patent in the coming years and become biosimilars, no? And there is a lot of potential, no? Because there are many of these drugs that will go off patent. However, there are I see some challenges, no, here, and you would think, okay, this is the secret sauce of Amgen. They have huge know-how on manufacturing. Their facilities are really good, very lean, much efficient than the others. They are very well positioned to take advantage of many of these biological drugs that will go off patent in the coming years, no? There's two caveats here why I don't think this is enough for me as an investor. One is that the biosimilar adoption in the US has been very low, and you can do some research on this by yourself. But it's not straightforward to get adoption because PBMs, especially in the US, are not necessarily interested in lower prices for drugs. So this creates, a bit of a misaligned incentives for adoption. I think this will get solved in the end because so much money it's being spent on these drugs that it's not sustainable otherwise. And then the second caveat, which I think it's the main one, is this enough of a moat, no? Because in the end, we're talking about efficiency and know-how of manufacturing, and obviously now they are at the front of this, but what if other companies decide to make similar investments in manufacturing? Is this know-how going to protect Amgen, and how hard it's to do that, no? To copy their facilities, and especially with a lot of Chinese manufacturers that will come into the market with fully subsidized production by the Chinese government, and will be able to produce these biosimilars at a much lower price, no? So I think this is the key question for me, and the reason why I don't see long-term defensibility in Amgen's strategy. I think probably they will do well, but I don't think this is enough. Okay, let's take a look at the other one. At the other two, actually, no? Because in this one, we'll look at both Novo Nordisk and United Therapeutics. Both are, in my opinion, really good companies, and as you can see, their outperformance on return on inventory, it's really high. Their gross margins, really good. And then SG&A as a percentage of revenue for Novo Nordisk, it's not so good. For United Therapeutics, it's okay-ish. And then R&D for Novo Nordisk, it's super low. And United Therapeutics, it's high, but there is a reason for that, no? And we'll look into this. So let's take a look at Novo Nordisk first, no? Actually, let me zoom in a bit more, and we're going to look at the left side, and then we'll do United Therapeutics on the right side. Okay, so return on inventory, why is it so high? No, return on inventory is basically driven by two things. As you said, very high gross margins, like 84% in the last 10 years compared to 73% average of all the other companies. It's huge difference. And also low expenditure as a percentage of revenue in R&D. So it's 13% for a company with a gross margins of 84%, and the average is 18, which is crazy. It's super low. They spend very little on internal research. But let's first look at gross margin. Why has Novo Nordisk been able to maintain this such a high gross margin? No, and as you can see, this is a graph from some source, no, but they are at the bottom, no. So one of the biggest pharma companies in the world, but they spend very little in both M&A, so acquiring external assets, but also, as we were saying, internal R&D. And then gross margin, no? Let's first actually start with the gross margin. I think it's probably most important to understand. So why they have been able to have such a high gross margin, no? So mainly it's because they have insulin, no? They have a monopoly on the market of insulin. That's the short version. And the long version, it's that insulin, it's not necessarily expensive to produce on a per unit basis, but also they have been able to protect very well their leading or monopolistic position in the market, no? And because insulin, as you know, this was invented decades ago. So the question is why, this is probably, there's a lot of press releases on this, no? But why there is no commercially viable generic insulin in the market? And we're starting to see this to change, and there's more and more generic insulin, no? But obviously this took decades, no? And what Novo Nordisk was able to do, it's they kept innovating both on the delivery method of insulin, so releasing more convenient, more advanced pens, and this is important, no? Because it means that when you copy and make the generic version of insulin, you also need to copy the delivery method. So if you have a complex delivery method like a EpiPen, or sorry, insulin pen that you've iterated, I don't know how many times, but at least 10 times in the last decades, that's very hard to copy. So it makes it harder for new entrants to come into the market, and also there are some patent shenanigans that you can do around delivery methods. So you can extend your patent based on changing of delivery methods, I think, but main thing is that it's very hard to copy. And then also on the insulin side, on the molecule side, so the insulin that we are taking right now, it's not the original molecule of insulin. It has been modified many times, no? And to increase the properties or to change the properties. So you have concentrated insulin, long-acting insulin, and the original molecule has changed a lot, and this has allowed for Novo Nordisk to not only keep patenting these more advanced molecules that are more convenient to patients. Actually, this is good for patients, but at the same time, it makes it hard to enter the market, no? Because you basically update the patent for a few more years with a new molecule, and these are also harder to copy because there are more complex molecules. And you can imagine as a generic company, it's like you would enter the auto market with a car that was made in the 70s, and if you would enter with the original insulin molecule, no? But now everyone is driving Teslas, so and the Tesla is still on patent, and it's very much harder to copy than the car that you had in the 70s, no? So in that sense, they have this strategy of just focusing on this product and to keep innovating on more different versions of the molecule that are more convenient to patients and different methods of or more advanced methods of delivery. It's a huge success story for them as a company. And for patients, you would argue also too, because these are good, no? This makes diabetes more easy to manage, more convenient, no? To manage. But at the same time, they've maintained these, I would say, higher prices in the market, which is not so good for the patients. There is also another important component here on Novo Nordisk, which is that it's a chronic disease, no? So the diabetes is a chronic disease, and it means that when you start using, especially if you're diagnosed with type 1 when you're very young, and it's a chronic disease you will have all your life, and you start using a certain product that actually works, why would you change, no? So the lifetime value of a customer versus how much it takes to acquire them for Novo Nordisk, it's very high, no? So they get the lifetime revenues of a certain patient that was diagnosed in, as I said, in the case type 1 diabetes, it's, I don't know, but probably below 10 years or something like that. And they have already, probably they got that patient for all his life, no? So you don't need to do marketing or anything on top of that. Just he will keep using the product that works for him, and this is super relevant. And then on the R&D expenditure as a percentage of revenue, so basically they have not diversified, no, in other areas until recently with the obesity, GLP-1s and so on. But for most of the company life, they were only doing insulin. So they have not had to spend huge amounts on internal R&D because they just kept iterating better versions of the same molecule. They didn't enter new disease areas and so on. No? So this has worked very well for them. And this is much cheaper than entering new disease areas and developing new molecules in oncology, for example, from scratch. And now you could argue that with this whole GLP-1 thing, the obesity drug, I mean, it has been good for them, but I don't know how good, no? Because at the same time they've entered a super competitive market, and they went out of their comfort zone. And this is also like one of the reasons I think PPE, it's not. Yeah, never mind. Actually, this is not super relevant. Let's look at United Therapeutics, no? But we see, why Novo Nordisk. It's because they had a monopoly of a certain disease area. They keep iterating in that disease area, and keep innovating, in that disease area. But United Therapeutics, similar to Novo Nordisk, very high gross margins. You could argue, probably think it's the highest one of all the ones we're analyzing. It's crazy. They do not spend a lot of money on marketing. They do spend a lot of money on R&D, but this is for another reason that we will see. It's not directly related to their core business right now, no? So why, no? Why do they have 92% gross margin? And this is similarly to Novo Nordisk. They are super focused in a highly profitable disease area that they control fully, which is pulmonary hypertension, no? So they have a series of different products, no? So you have inhaled dry power, ultrasonic nebulizer, subcutaneous injections, intravenous injections, oral tablets, all of these different delivery methods and molecules covering pulmonary hypertension, no? So what they, similarly to Novo Nordisk, they are hyper focused in this disease area, and they own it, no? And they keep launching new delivery methods, more convenient for patients, new molecules, and so on. And they create this stickiness, no? And they keep renovating the patents. Makes it even harder to copy because you have a combination of drug with a dry powder inhaler or an ultrasonic nebulizer, no? So in this case, they are doing a very good job, and I think probably for the patients, these innovations are also much more convenient, no? Then the next question is, um, all these molecules are mainly small molecules, so they are not into biologics, which means that their manufacturing costs are very low, no? So if their manufacturing costs are very low, why is their return on PPE so low? It's because they're investing huge amounts of money on a new therapeutic area, which is xenotransplant. So basically helping people getting transplants of organs from animals, which I think it's a super good idea and will be a very good business in the future. But that's the reason they are doing. They are making a lot of new facilities for this, a lot of capex investment. So that's the reason their return on tangible assets it's not super high. And then, as I was saying, their return on marketing it's not super high also because they own this therapeutic area, right? So doctors know that the only drug available for pulmonary hypertension patients probably comes from United Therapeutics. And I think that's about it. I mean, another maybe relevant thing is that pulmonary hypertension it's a chronic disease. I mean, you don't have, unfortunately, very high life expectancy. I think it's 6 years with medication after diagnosis, but it means that you have these patients for 6 years with you. So from an economical perspective for the company, it's also good. Okay, but in the end, what we can start to see here, it's a pattern, no, on the strategy of these companies and why they have been able to achieve better returns than their competitors. Let's look at the last two because this video is already, I think it's already quite long, and I wanted to make it a bit short, no? But the two last examples are Gilead and AbbVie, two amazing companies, no? So, and in this case, they have both super high return on inventory, super high return on property, plant, and equipment. Same for AbbVie. And the question, as always, it's why, no? Why this is the case? And I think we'll see some similar patterns here than what we saw in the last examples, no? So let's first look at Gilead, no? So they have very high gross margin, only behind Novo Nordisk and probably actually United Therapeutics, but 81%, super high. And this is because for mainly three reasons, no? I mean, just a bit of context, Gilead it's the main player in the HIV market. So they have also a monopolistic leading position and had for years in that market. And the drug that they manufacture is a generic drug, a small molecule drug. So this means that the manufacturing cost of this drug it's very low. Then another pattern that we see it's also chronic disease. No, when you have HIV, I think probably the age of diagnosis must be between 25 and 30, something like that. Late 20s, and it's a disease that you have all your life. And I think fortunately now, thanks to these drugs, you live to have a full expectancy. So in the end, this is a lot of years and recurrent revenue for the company that you will have, no? Because these patients, as I said before, if they're taking your drug and it works, and they've been taking your drug for the last 10 years, why are they going to change a new drug that may not work as well for them? So similarly to insulin, you have very high LTV to acquisition ratio. No? So when you have one of these patients, if you do a good job as a company, you'll have them for the rest of their life. And it's also a serious disease. No? So, I mean, if you don't take the medication, you don't have very good expectations, let's say, no? It's a serious disease, and if it's not treated, it also has a very high cost for the healthcare system. So it deserves a very high reimbursement price, and everyone that has HIV should be under medication, and this is the best for the patients and also for society, as a whole, obviously. And then lowest expenditure on marketing. So basically, similarly to what we saw with Novo, United Therapeutics, you start to see this pattern. They are only focused on HIV. I mean, mainly they do other stuff, but HIV it's their 90-80% of the revenues come from there. And they don't have that many competitors in the market. I think there's only 2 other companies in there. Average R&D spend, I think expend in marketing, it's 18%. It's the lowest of all of them. No? So I was saying, everybody knows Gilead in the HIV market, and R&D not super high, not super low. They need to keep investing because they need to keep investing in new molecules because in the end, I think the delivery method has already been oral for a long time, and it's fine. It works. Like, it's difficult to improve on that. And what they're doing is basically creating new molecules that last longer. So you don't have to take it every day. You take it once a month or whatever, no? And as you can see, no? So Biktarvy, it's their main drug. Boom. They launched it. They took most of the market. And the ones that lost patent, they lost the revenues, no? But they've been very successful at switching their patients from drugs that go off patent to better ones that actually have better, more convenient and better outcomes, no? And this is, so 51% of US market share, 40% of US market share. Probably if you look globally, their market share is also much bigger, no? So overall, it's really good company. You can see what's their competitive mode, no? And it's super focused on a certain therapeutic area, keep innovating in that therapeutic area, and becoming the leading player in the market in that therapeutic area. And then the therapeutic area also happens to have a chronic disease that has that deserves a higher reimbursement price, no? Let's look at AbbVie. So similarly to the other ones, and this is a bit harder to understand because AbbVie is much more diversified than all the other players that we've seen. So they are into immunology, hematology, neuroscience, and aesthetics also. So there's a mix of things. I think what is really profitable here is, and they also acquired Allergan, the owner of Botox, recently. So they have a very strong position in aesthetics, which is super profitable, and then that comes basically from their Botox, which it's the main product. And then they also own Humira, which has been one of the biggest blockbusters of biologic blockbusters in the last few years. Then they lower than average marketing spend, but really not that low. So I think here it's a different mix of things, so it's difficult to analyze. Quite lower in the expenditure. I think it comes from 2 things. One is that they have been more focused on M&A. I think they've been really good at acquiring companies and allocating capital, AbbVie. Like, their management, I guess, must be very good. And then the other is that the cost of production of aesthetic products like Botox and so on, it's probably very low, so that brings the average for all the therapeutic areas down. And here, I think what's interesting now is that Humira has been like one of their main money makers in the past decade, I would say, and they've been able to protect that very well with patents, but now it's going off patent. In Europe, already they lost a lot of market share. I think in the US, it's increasing much slower because what we said before, no, that the incentives of PBMs are a bit misaligned. So the adoption of other biological products, it's taking biosimilar products, it's taking a lot of time. But here is what I was saying, no, like what's for me it's interesting about AbbVie is that they have a leading position in aesthetics, no. So market share, almost all above 50%, and obviously the crown jewel, it's Botox, no? Um, and I think, just closing on Avi, the high return on inventory has basically coming from higher gross margins from Umira, and now also all the aesthetic products contributing to that. Not much marketing spend, very low R&D expenditure. As we said, I think this is a bit misleading because they balance it with higher spend on M&A, which does not show in the income statement. And this is important because we need to evaluate how good companies are also at M&A to understand if they are good at capital allocation overall. And this will be actually the last video we'll do of the third and last video I will do for this series. I will look basically at capital allocation and M&A for pharma companies and how to compare and understand them. And I think, well, in summary, Avi, good acquisitions. I think the question is, will they be able to keep the leading position on aesthetics, and what will happen to Umira, which has been the main moneymaker in the last year? So I think now they are on shaky grounds, I would say. And that's it. I think going back to the main tab and summarizing a bit what we've seen. No? So there are some common patterns. I think pharma companies that are focused on a particular disease area that have high recurrency, especially like chronic diseases, are doing better than average. Companies that are creating competitive moats in these disease areas by product innovation, creating a franchise, creating different products, different delivery methods, improving on the main molecule, making it more convenient, perform better than average. And obviously this leads to the other pattern that we saw, is that most of these overperforming companies are market leaders. No, they have the highest market share in the markets that they are present in. And then just to finalize, I added one of my favorite valuation metrics here, as you can see, which is enterprise value to free cash flow. And this tells us, assuming obviously no patent expiration, how many years it takes to pay for the company at the current cash flow and price. And that's it, no? How many years it takes to pay for the company at the current cash flow and price. And I think it's interesting because some of the cheaper companies that we find from all of them are the ones that are performing very well. No? So I think Gilead could be interesting. I think that the share price has increased a bit since I did this analysis, but hopefully it's still interesting. I think United Therapeutics, it's super interesting. And I will do a deep dive on this company in the future probably. Then it seems EMS is also cheap compared to their return on tangible assets and free cash flow. And Avi, it's quite expensive. That's it. I think this is it. I hope this was interesting. I will release a third video on last one, focusing on comparing capital efficiency of different pharma companies, especially on external M&A. And that's it. Have a good one, guys.